Asajj Ventress is one of the most fascinating and tragic characters in all of Star Wars. Change one decision in her youth, and we don't just save one life story, we potentially rewrite the entire Clone Wars. In the canon timeline, Ventress goes from Dathomiri child to abandoned Padawan to Dooku's personal assassin, cutting down Jedi in the shadows while trading barbs with Anakin and Obi-Wan. "I'm impressed," Obi-Wan tells her at one point. "Most impressive." And he means her skill even as they're trying to kill each other. But what if that relationship never started with blades at each other's throats at all? What if the Jedi Order never lost her? For this video, we're narrowing the whole galaxy down to one precise pivot point. Kai Narek finds young Ventress, brings her to the Jedi, and this time the Order actually keeps her. No years stranded on Ratatak, no warlord adopting her, no desperate grief that leaves her wide open to Dooku. Instead of being molded as a Sith assassin, she's shaped as a Jedi from start to finish. I thought it would be fun to walk through an entire alternate timeline of Ventress's life if she never fell. So the focus here isn't just one battle or one duel, it's her full story in order. From Dathomir child to Temple Youngling, to disciplined but fierce Jedi Knight, to Clone Wars general fighting alongside the heroes we already know, and eventually to whatever role she carves out in a galaxy that might not fall the same way. As we move through each era of the prequels, we'll look at how her presence bends events. A Jedi Ventress on Geonosis changes that first chaotic arena battle, of course. Her rivalry with Anakin turns into a tense partnership in the 501st instead of a vendetta. Obi-Wan gains a fellow tactician who understands unconventional warfare. Dooku loses his most iconic enforcer and has to improvise a whole new squad of dark side agents. And Sidious, who once feared her growing strength and ordered her death, now has to account for one of the deadliest warriors in the galaxy, being loyal to the very order he wants to destroy. That means we're also going to push all the way into the highest stakes. How a loyal Jedi Ventress could alter the setup for Order 66, the fate of the Night Sisters, and even the conditions of Anakin's fall. Now, there will be major spoilers for the Clone Wars, the novel Dark Disciple, and the prequel films as we remix them into this new story, so there's your warning. Now, let's get started with a very different beginning for Asajj Ventress. So before we rewrite her charging into battle with Anakin instead of trying to decapitate him, we need to be really clear on what we're doing with this timeline. We are not throwing canon in the trash. We're taking the existing Ventress story, laying it out in strict order, and then asking what changes if one crucial decision at the Jedi Temple goes differently. The core premise is simple. In canon, Ventress is born on Dathomir, taken off-world, discovered by Jedi Knight Kai Narek, and trained as his Padawan on Ratatak. He dies, she's abandoned, the warlords chew her up, and eventually Dooku swoops in to weaponize all that grief. Here, we're keeping almost all of those ingredients, but as I said, we're reordering and redirecting them. She is still Dathomiri, still frighteningly strong in the Force, but from the moment the Jedi find her, they actually follow through. So the organizing principle for this whole what-if is in-universe chronological. I thought it would be fun to treat this like we treated that Clone Squad timeline. We start with her birth among the Night Sisters, move to her discovery and arrival at the Temple, follow her through Youngling training and Padawan years, step into the Clone Wars as a frontline Jedi Knight, and then push all the way past Order 66 into the Age of the Empire. No jumping back and forth between episodes like the show does, no hopping from Dooku's lair to Dathomir and back. Just a clean, start-to-finish life. That means we need some ground rules. First, Ventress is accepted fully into the Jedi Order as a youngling. No being parked on Ratatak as an unofficial apprentice, no falling through the cracks when her master dies. Second, she is never recruited by Dooku, so all of those assassin missions, all those "you are an embarrassment to the Sith" moments, are gone or heavily remixed. Third, her Night Sister heritage stays important, but it doesn't get twisted into Sith-style vengeance. Think more Ahsoka visiting the Togruta colony than Savage Opress going full rage monster. Now, there will be major spoilers, not just for the Clone Wars, but for the novel Dark Disciple and the broad prequel era setup, so there's your warning. We're going to take her duels with Obi-Wan and Anakin, her betrayal by Dooku, her role in the plot against him, her eventual work with Quinlan Vos, and break them apart to rebuild a coherent Jedi-loyal version of her life. From here, we move into the backstory phase. Imagine that first big divergence. A Jedi Council that actually looks at this terrified Dathomiri child and says, "We are responsible for you," instead of letting war and distance raise her. What does a temple-raised Ventress look like on Dathomir, on Geonosis, on the front lines of the Clone Wars? That's where we're headed next. Now, let's get started by grounding this in the canon version of her life. Asajj Ventress is born on Dathomir, among the Night Sisters, in a culture that treats the Force as clan magic and survival instinct, long before anyone says the word Jedi. Her mother gives her up to protect her from Dathomir's dangers, and that sacrifice is the first fracture in her sense of belonging. She's taken off-world, ends up on Ratatak in the middle of brutal war, and that's where Jedi Knight Kai Narek finds her. In the original timeline, Narek sees this terrified, viciously talented girl and does the best he can. He trains her as his Padawan in a fringe war zone, far from Coruscant, far from the temple, far from any real support system. When he's killed by warlords, Ventress breaks. She leans into her anger, declares herself a Sith, and eventually becomes Dooku's assassin. That path is built on loss, stacked on loss. Now there will be major spoilers for how we break that path, so there's your warning. In our version, Narek makes one different choice. He survives his last big battle on Ratatak long enough to get a signal through and bring Ventress to Coruscant. Instead of keeping her as an isolated field Padawan, he presents her to the Council as a child who needs the full structure of the Order. They were wary, of course. This is a Dathomiri witch child raised in war. But rather than sending her back to the fringes, they formally accept her into the Youngling squads, under temple supervision, while Narek recovers and eventually resumes guiding her. So now we have Ventress stepping into the temple for the first time. The culture shock is massive. She's gone from Night Sister chants and battlefield instincts to meditation halls, training remotes, and instructors quoting, "There is no emotion, there is peace," at her every time she glares. Her raw force potential stands out immediately. Telekinetic bursts that send training droids flying, saber drills where she's already favoring aggressive, dual-blade movements long before it's standard for a Padawan. The Council doesn't ignore the danger this time. They deliberately surround her with consistent mentors, group exercises, and a clear code. The key emotional shift is that she doesn't have to interpret every departure as abandonment. When Narek leaves on missions, there are still Creche Masters, other Younglings, and older Padawans who treat her as part of a squad, not a weapon. Instead of warlords praising her rage, she hears Jedi calmly naming her fear and teaching her how to channel it. As I said, that doesn't magically erase the intensity that makes Ventress who she is. It just gives it rails. I thought it would be fun to end this part on a warning. This temple-raised Ventress is still sharp-tongued, still drawn to the edge of every rule, still the one who volunteers for the hardest sparring matches. The difference is that, for now, all of that ferocity is pointed outward, at threats to the Order, not inward at herself. So what happens when the Clone Wars erupt and that controlled fire is finally unleashed on a galactic battlefield? Now, let's get started by dropping this temple-forged Ventress right onto the familiar timeline. When Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan walk back into the Jedi Temple at the end of The Phantom Menace, they're not just bringing in the Chosen One. They're walking past a slightly older youngling, Asajj Ventress, who's already known for finishing drills early and staring down training remotes until they decide to stop shooting. She's maybe 3 or 4 years ahead of Anakin, old enough to be running advanced katas in the dojo while he's still tripping over his braid in the initiate classes. The clones are still years away, but the temple is already a pressure cooker. Council whispers about Anakin's late start echo through the halls, and Ventress hears all of it. From her point of view, this desert kid walks in and instantly bends the whole squad of masters around him. Of course she resents that at first. The early dynamic between them is rough. Ventress is intense, disciplined, the one who double-checks the lesson forms when everyone else bolts for the refectory. Anakin is raw talent and emotion. He shows off with the training remotes. She cuts them down with surgical precision. At one point, you can almost hear a young Obi-Wan mutter that famous, "Why do I get the feeling you're going to be the death of me?" under his breath about both of them. But, as I said, the Order underestimates how shared pain can bridge that gap. I thought it would be fun to lean into the late-night training sessions, where the temple is quiet, and the stars over Coruscant are the only thing moving. Anakin sneaks back into the dojo to run forms because he's afraid of failing. Ventress is already there, working through a Dathomiri-flavored variation of Shicho that she's not supposed to use. They circle, spar, and eventually talk. Those conversations are where the sibling rivalry energy really forms. They were both taken from harsh worlds. They both carry a sense that the Council doesn't fully trust them. Ventress talks in guarded pieces about Night Sisters and loss. Anakin talks around the word mom, but never quite says it. They compete in every exercise, but they also start saving spots for each other on the mat, the way Domino Squad eventually watched each other's backs in the field. Temple instructors can see the edge in Ventress. Instead of suppressing it, masters like Plo Koon and Shaak Ti are quietly assigned to her rotations. Plo validates her instincts without glorifying aggression. Shaak Ti, already patient with clones in training in another part of the timeline, treats Ventress's Night Sister background as a culture to understand, not a stain to erase. By the time Anakin is a Padawan, Ventress has become one of the only people who can look him in the eye when he's furious and say, "I know exactly what that feels like." That connection is a seed. It can grow into shared defiance or shared redemption. The real question is which way it bends once war finally arrives. Now that we've planted that seed between Anakin and Ventress, we hit the next big fork in the timeline. Who actually gets to shape her into a Jedi Knight? Because if Kai Narek doesn't die in some forgotten backwater war, the Order suddenly has options. On paper, keeping Narek as her master makes sense. He already reached through her fear once. But the Council isn't blind here. They see a Dathomiri youngling with Night Sister roots, raw power, and a temper that could rival a certain Chosen One. So they step in. I thought it would be fun to give them a rare moment of actual long-term planning. Narek keeps her, but under tighter oversight from someone like Plo Koon. Plo is the perfect counterweight. Battle-tested, compassionate, the guy who brought in the clones and still calls them my men with real warmth. Put Ventress in that orbit, and her intensity doesn't get crushed, it gets translated. As I said, you can almost hear Plo telling the Council, "She is not dangerous because of where she comes from. She is dangerous if we do not guide where she is going." So her Padawan years become a rotation between Narek's one-on-one mentorship and Plo's larger campaigns in the Outer Rim. They were not safe temple exercises. These are missions against slavers on worlds that look a lot like the ones that stole her childhood. Warbands, crime syndicates, Hutt enforcers who sneer at Jedi peacekeepers before getting slammed into a wall. Now, there will be major spoilers for her emotional growth, so there's your warning. She keeps running into echoes of her own trauma and doesn't answer with a massacre. Instead, we see something the canon never let her have. In one episode of her life, a slaver begs for mercy, and Ventress hesitates, fingers tight on her hilt. Narek is there, calm but firm, walking her through justice without cruelty. Eventually, she starts volunteering for these missions, not to feed her anger, but to make sure no other kid ends up on an auction block. Her combat style still evolves into that iconic dual saber form. The difference is framing. Inside the Order, it's not a feral whirlwind, it's a discipline. A dance she practices in empty hangars, 2 green blades cutting precise arcs as clones on break stop to watch. Plo and Narek don't punish her unorthodox tactics, they debrief them. You flanked through a sewer to avoid civilian casualties? Good. Refine it. Now, let's get started on the really dangerous part of this choice. That same creativity and quiet ruthlessness, once fully harnessed for the light, is exactly what the Republic will turn into a weapon. When the Clone Wars finally erupt, Ventress won't be a rogue assassin on the Separatist side. She'll be one of the Jedi's sharpest generals, and that is going to change every battlefield we thought we knew. Now, let's get started on what really makes this version of Ventress different from the one we know. In canon, her Dathomiri past is a wound that never closes, something the dark side keeps ripping open. Here, the Jedi don't pretend Dathomir never happened. They do what they've always done with other Force traditions. They study, they question, and very cautiously, they contextualize. We've seen the Order interact with the Lasats, the Bardatans, the Guardians of the Wills. In this timeline, Ventress's masters file Dathomir right next to those in the archives. It's not a heritage to erase, it's a data point. Jocasta Nu would absolutely have a sealed holo file labeled Night Sisters, Folk Myth, or Force Sect. And Ventress, as I said, becomes the living answer to that question. The Council is wary of the Ichor, the rituals, the stories of blood and sacrifice, but they're not ignorant of it. Eventually, that curiosity turns into action. Late in her Padawan years, Ventress and her master are assigned to a diplomatic mission to Dathomir. Now, there will be major spoilers for her emotional arc here, so there's your warning. Instead of returning as a weapon or a lost child, she lands as a Jedi envoy, robes and all, walking into Mother Talzin's mist-filled lair with equal parts fear and resolve. The planet that once meant abandonment now becomes a place where she can ask, very directly, who she is. Pattern interrupt for a second. Imagine Obi-Wan's so uncivilized energy, but aimed at Night Sister spell bottles and bone charms scattered around the fire. It's tense, but it's not a duel. Talzin recognizes the girl taken from her world. The Jedi recognize a culture that survived on the margins. They negotiate terms, they trade guarded truths. And Ventress walks away with something priceless. Permission to remember Dathomir without being owned by it. From that point, her training shifts. She doesn't hurl green ichor or chant over cauldrons, but she does start to lean into the Night Sister instincts that were always there. Heightened intuition becomes a formal tool in her Jedi toolkit. Where another knight might rely on battle meditation, Ventress threads tiny illusions through the Force. A flicker of movement to misdirect a droid squad, a whispered presence to make a bounty hunter hesitate. All of it sits inside clear ethical lines set by her master and the Council. That balance turns her into a cultural bridge. When the Order sends negotiators to fringe Force cults, Ventress is the one who can say, "We were all children of the Force before we were Jedi." She undercuts the quiet arrogance that says the Temple has the only correct manual. I thought it would be fun to trace how that humility directly messes with Sith expectations. Because Sidious and Dooku are counting on Jedi rigidity, they expect straight-line thinkers, predictable tactics, and emotional blind spots. Ventress is none of that. She is Jedi discipline fused with Night Sister instinct, a warrior who can slip around their plans instead of slamming into them. And when the Clone Wars erupt, that hybrid mindset is exactly what will make her one of the few Jedi they can't quite script into Order 66. So if the Sith are quietly mapping out Jedi weaknesses, Ventress is the outlier in all their charts, and that really comes into focus on the eve of the Clone Wars. By the time we hit the Attack of the Clones timeline, she's no longer the angry, half-trained survivor from Ratatak. She's either a freshly knighted Jedi, or that terrifyingly competent senior Padawan everyone assumes will pass her trials on the first attempt. The Council has learned a simple pattern with her: send Ventress to the places no one else wants to go. While other Padawans rotate through Coruscant security or calm negotiations, she's out in the Outer Rim, dismantling pirate syndicates, tracking down rogue darkside cults, and escorting vulnerable colonies that the Republic barely remembers it governs. They were routine protection details on paper, but in practice they were the kind of missions that end with smoking craters and very short reports. This reputation brings her into regular orbit with Mace Windu. He's the one who signs off on those assignments, and there's a wary respect there. Mace sees the aggression, the Night Sister edge, the way her hand drifts toward her hilts a second before a meeting goes bad, but he also sees that she pulls back when civilians are in the crossfire, that she follows orders even when she thinks the Council is dragging its feet. If Mace is the Order's hardline, Ventress is the blade he quietly sends to walk it. Obi-Wan, on the other hand, understands her in a more personal way. Both of them came out of messy, war-torn upbringings, and both learned to bury that under dry wit and Jedi poise. I thought it would be fun to imagine the two of them trading stories after a mission, Obi-Wan quoting, "Another happy landing," while Ventress raises an eyebrow at the crater behind them. When the Council needs someone who can talk first and fight second, but who won't hesitate to reverse that order mid-sentence, they often pair her with him. And then there's Anakin. He's the chosen one, the hero of the Rim. She's the Outer Rim specialist who keeps solving problems without prophecy. Their dynamic is a competitive camaraderie from the start. Sparring sessions in the temple turn into full-on duels that draw crowds of clones and Padawans. Anakin jokes that she's cheating whenever she switches grips or uses an unorthodox feint. She fires back that he's the one who keeps ignoring form basics. As I said, they push each other in ways the Council doesn't entirely control. All of this plays out against a republic she no longer trusts. Ventress walks the Senate corridors and feels the rot. She sees lobbyists whispering in ears, votes bought with shipping contracts, and whole sectors abandoned until war profits are on the table. She's impatient with the Jedi's political neutrality, asking in Council debriefs why they keep rescuing systems the Senate will just sell out again. But she still believes in the core promise: protect the helpless, keep the Force in balance, stand between the galaxy and the darkness. So the Council uses her as their high-risk specialist. If a situation might need a negotiator, a frontline commander, and a duelist who can hang with Sith-trained killers, Ventress gets the briefing. Geonosian weapons factories rumored in the Outer Rim. She's on the scouting team. Separatist meetings that probably won't turn violent. She's quietly added to the roster. Now, there will be major spoilers for the Battle of Geonosis in the next part, so there's your warning. Because when those gunships roar into the arena, Ventress isn't a shadowy assassin in the stands. She's on the sand, lightsabers already drawn, standing between Anakin, Obi-Wan, and a very different opening move in the Clone Wars. So, now we drop straight into the dust and chaos of Geonosis, but this time the timeline is already warped the second those gunship doors slam open. Blaster fire is everywhere, Jedi are scattered across the arena, and instead of Anakin and Obi-Wan trading, "We're here to rescue you" banter alone, there's a third presence stepping off the ramp with them. Knight Asajj Ventress, hood down, eyes locked on the execution pillars. From the start, the Council hasn't sent her to sit on the sidelines. They were the ones who slotted her into the main rescue squad, backing up Obi-Wan and Anakin as a kind of fast-moving shock unit. While Mace Windu strides out to confront Dooku in the stands, Ventress peels off with the younger Jedi, sprinting across the sand as droidekas roll into position, and super battle droids drop in around them. This is where her presence really hits. Two white blades snap to life in the red haze, and she moves with that same ferocity we know from the show, but now it's leashed, focused, drilled by years of temple discipline. She carves a clean line through a squad of B2s, sabers crossing and uncrossing in tight arcs, and even battle-hardened masters pause for half a second. They were expecting a promising knight. What they're seeing is a living battering ram in Jedi robes. As I said, the key difference is intent. In canon, Ventress toys with opponents, enjoying the fear. Here, she's counting angles and allies. When a hail of blaster fire pins down a group of younger Jedi and their clone escort, she doesn't charge straight in for glory. She signals the nearest clone squad, coordinates a quick flanking maneuver, and then slams into the droids from the side, so the troopers can punch through. It's brutal, but it's also textbook. I thought it would be fun to flip one of the most famous Geonosis beats too. Instead of Dooku watching her from afar as his future assassin, he suddenly finds her cutting through the last line of arena droids and leaping up toward the balcony where he's withdrawing. Their eyes meet, and for a heartbeat, he's staring at a path not taken. The student he might have trained inside the Order rather than in the shadows. Their blades clash, and it's jarring for him. Ventress uses feints and reverse grips that echo forms Dooku once favored, forcing him to adapt to a style he secretly helped shape through old Temple holo recordings and Narek's lineage. He's still the superior duelist, of course, but she's fast enough and coordinated enough to stall his retreat, buying Yoda and the gunships a few precious moments. That delay matters. In the chaos below, she spots a Geonosian cannon lining up on a cluster of Jedi, trying to reach a crashed LA-AT. She breaks off from pursuing Dooku, hurls herself down into the line of fire, and intercepts a blast that would have vaporized a half-dozen survivors. The clones she'd just led in that flanking run drag wounded masters onto the last departing gunship. By the time the dust settles and the droid factories are in flames, the Council has a new data point. Geonosis hasn't just launched the Clone Wars, it's also revealed that Ventress isn't merely another knight, she's a force multiplier. Her performance here, commanding clones under fire, dueling Dooku himself, and walking out alive, quietly cements her as one of the Order's most formidable frontline warriors. Now, there will be major spoilers for the early war campaigns next, because when the Republic starts assigning Jedi generals to lead its new clone army, Ventress doesn't have to lobby for a command. She's the obvious choice, and that single promotion will twist nearly every major episode of the conflict that follows. Now, let's get started with the other side of this timeline, because while the Jedi Council is handing Ventress a command, somewhere in the shadows, Count Dooku is realizing that one of his favorite future assets simply does not exist. In canon, Dooku finds Ventress on Ratatak, broken by war and loss, and he forges her into his personal assassin. Here, that recruitment scene never happens. The girl he would have exploited is still in Jedi robes, so his go-to blade in the dark is gone before it ever forms. That has real strategic fallout. Without Ventress running high-risk missions, Dooku has to lean harder on the tools we already know he dislikes relying on too much. So he throws more responsibility on other dark acolytes, on bounty hunters, and of course on the droid armies. Instead of a single terrifying enforcer who can duel Obi-Wan and Anakin at the same time, he's coordinating massed B-1s and B-2s, super tactical droids, and blunt instruments like Dirge. It works, eventually, but it doesn't have that surgical edge Ventress gave him in the show. The first time Dooku actually crosses blades with Ventress in this version is a huge character moment. Picture Geonosis or an early war episode. Dust, blaster fire, clones charging, and Dooku suddenly facing a bald Kiefer-tattooed Jedi Knight with twin green blades. He recognizes the stance. He remembers the desperate child he once sensed from afar. Now she's not begging for power. She's ordering a clone squad into formation. His reaction is this strange mix of annoyance and fascination. Annoyance, because a potential apprentice has become a real problem. Fascination, because the Jedi somehow took that pain and turned it into discipline instead of rage. Sidious, watching all of this through reports and spies, has to adjust as well. In canon, he uses Ventress as a pressure valve, a way to test Dooku's loyalty, then orders her discarded when she grows too strong. As I said, that whole subplot is gone. So there's your warning. Palpatine reallocates those resources. I thought it would be fun to imagine him accelerating other projects, pushing Grievous's upgrades sooner, greenlighting early Inquisitorious prototypes, and experimenting with more aggressive brainwashing of captured Jedi. Psychologically, this hits Dooku harder than he admits. Ventress becomes a walking rebuttal to his favorite excuse that the Jedi always abandon the broken and the lost. Every time she blocks his lightning or rallies terrified clones with a steady, "We're all in this together," she proves that not every wounded child had to become his weapon. That eats at his self-justification in a way Sidious definitely notices. So Dooku responds in the only way he knows. He escalates. The sieges get nastier, civilian targets start appearing on his lists, and he designs campaigns specifically to grind down Ventress's morale, forcing her to choose between victory and the strict Jedi Code. How far will she go when the man who might have been her Sith master turns whole worlds into bait just to break her? We'll see that in the next part, when one brutal decision on the battlefield pushes Ventress right up to the edge of the light. That brutal decision doesn't break her, it forges her reputation. By the mid-war period, Ventress is no longer just another knight on the roster. She's General Ventress with a dedicated battalion whose armor is scarred from following her into places most Jedi won't even put on a mission report. This squad is unofficially called the Fangs. Of course, the clones named themselves that. They were the ones who noticed that Ventress never hangs back on the ridge with the binoculars. If she orders a push through a kill zone, she's in the front rank, sabers lit, taking the same fire. In a war where a lot of commanders stay behind the lines, that matters. It echoes Anakin's 501st, but where the 501st celebrate wild heroics, the Fangs appreciate how ruthlessly practical she is. Her command style is aggressive, but never reckless. As I said, she brings a Night Sister edge to a very Jedi playbook. Instead of straight-line assaults, she stages ambushes in ruined cities, uses misdirection with decoy gunships, and turns separatist droid logic against itself. There's an episode-worthy moment on Seleucami where she has her clones broadcast false casualty reports, tricking a droid commander into overextending, then collapses the whole formation with a flanking strike the clones still tell stories about. Ventress also leans into psychological warfare. She studies droid commanders, learns their patterns, and then breaks them. She'll order her men to paint mocking tally marks of destroyed tanks on their armor where the tactical droid's sensors can see them. One of her officers jokes, "We're putting fear into machines, General." That's a new one. It's fun for the squad, but it's also part of a very deliberate timeline of pressure she keeps on every front she's assigned. Now, there will be major spoilers for the emotional side of this, so there's your warning. Ventress actually knows her clones. She gives them nicknames that stick. A sniper called Whisper, a medic called Stitch, a heavy gunner she just calls Wall. She listens when they complain about rotations, or about how command treats them as numbers. When the Council pushes a plan that treats the Fangs as expendable, she's the one in the briefing room saying, "They're soldiers, not munitions." That doesn't go unnoticed. Some Jedi, especially Anakin and Obi-Wan, respect her results and her loyalty to her men. Others whisper that she's too comfortable using fear, too quick to weaponize reputation and intimidation, even if it's only against droids. There's a sense that she's walking a thinner line than most of them are willing to admit they walk too. Now, let's get started on why that makes her dangerous to the other side. Her win rate and the Fangs' growing legend put her on separatist priority lists. Dooku starts assigning specialized hunters, and eventually Grievous himself, to remove General Ventress from the board, setting up some very personal duels in the next part of this story. Now, let's get started on what that actually looks like on the ground, because this is where the timeline really feels different. Instead of dueling to the death, Ventress is dropping out of gunships shoulder to shoulder with Anakin and Obi-Wan, and the three of them quickly become a terrifyingly effective squad. Obi-Wan brings the measured, textbook Jedi form, Anakin brings raw power and improvisation, and Ventress threads the needle between them with this cold, calculated ferocity that still stays just inside the code. Their early joint missions on worlds like Christophsis and Moonalinst set the tone. We still get that classic, "you're shorter than I expected" banter, but now it's on the same side, with Ventress dryly adding that separatist generals are always taller in their propaganda. In the first big assault, Anakin dives through the lines in a gunship. Ventress freefalls next to him using the Force to redirect blaster bolts, and Obi-Wan lands last, already sighing that they were supposed to wait for artillery. As I said, the choreography becomes this three-part harmony where each of them is trying to prove their approach works best. I thought it would be fun to lean into how competitive Anakin and Ventress get, because that's exactly what happens. They start keeping informal kill counts over open comms, quoting clones who bet rations on who tags more droids. On one captured cruiser, they race through parallel corridors, meeting in the middle of the bridge after cutting down entire squads of B1s. Ventress is the one who suggests psychological tactics, slicing blast doors just enough to let the droids see her sabers before sealing them again, while Anakin pushes for harsher interrogations of officers. Those debates get heated very fast. That's where Obi-Wan steps in as the moderating influence. He still cracks that classic, "so uncivilized" line after Anakin and Ventress blow a hole through a fortress wall instead of using the gate, but he also calls them out when their intensity drifts too close to fear and cruelty. On one siege, Anakin wants to threaten a captured tactical droid's memory core. Ventress proposes staging a fake execution to break a Neimoidian, and Obi-Wan flatly shuts it down. Now, there will be major spoilers for their dynamic later, so there's your warning, but he quietly notices something important. Ventress can actually talk Anakin down in the debriefs in a way he never fully could. We also get the smaller beats that make this trio feel real. In the gunship, they trade dry jokes about the Council sending them to clean up after other generals, with the clones chiming in that this is the Fang Squadron Special. On long hyperspace jumps, Ventress and Obi-Wan share low-voiced conversations about the cost of the war, about how many younglings they've already lost, and she admits that if not for the Order, Dathomir would have swallowed her whole. Eventually, their results speak for themselves. They're the team you deploy when a planet is about to fall, or when Dooku is rumored to be on the move in person. That makes them one of the Republic's most effective strike units, and, from Sidious's perspective, a very serious problem. In the next part of this story, we'll see how he starts trying to pull that trio apart from the shadows. Sidious wants that trio broken up, but he also wants something else: Dathomir erased from the board. Now, there will be major spoilers for the Night Sisters arc in the Clone Wars, so there's your warning. In canon, the massacre on Dathomir is brutal, fast, and very personal. It's Dooku and Grievous getting revenge after Ventress turns on them. Here, that revenge motive just isn't there. Ventress never becomes Dooku's assassin, so he can't send General Grievous to punish her people for a betrayal that never happens. The threat to Dathomir shifts from personal vendetta to cold strategy. Sidious and Dooku still look at the Night Sisters as a wild, unaligned dark-side tradition, and from their perspective, you don't leave that kind of power sitting around in the Outer Rim. You either control it, or you wipe it out. The difference in this timeline is that the Jedi now know Dathomir isn't just a rumor. Ventress has been open about where she came from, and as I said, by this point she's a trusted field general. She's argued in council briefings that the Night Sisters are dangerous but not inherently Sith, and that alone already complicates the Order's usual light versus dark categories. So when separatist fleets start massing in the sector, it's not a footnote on a star chart, it's personal. She's the first one to say, "Send a squad, send me." I thought it would be fun to lean into that first arrival on Dathomir. Picture a Venator dropping out of hyperspace over the Red Planet, gunships full of clones and Jedi, and Ventress standing at the ramp, jaw set. On the ground, Mother Talzin and her coven are waiting, cloaked in mist and green ichor. The first meeting is not friendly. Talzin throws out lines about Jedi chains and stolen children, and one of the clone sergeants mutters that this is worse than Umbara. But when separatist landing craft start punching through the clouds, everyone understands they were just drafted into the same battle. What follows is a joint defense that never happens in canon. Ventress coordinates with Talzin, Obi-Wan, and Plo Koon, turning the forests into kill zones. Night Sister archers fire spirit-infused arrows through battle droids, while clones set up artillery behind walls of conjured mist. At one point, Ventress and Talzin literally argue mid-duel with Grievous over whether the Republic will abandon Dathomir afterward. It's tense, it's messy, and it's exactly the kind of uneasy alliance the war keeps forcing on people. Because they were ready, the Night Sisters survive. Not untouched, not unscarred, but intact enough to remain a power. That has massive mystical fallout. Instead of becoming a graveyard, Dathomir turns into a neutral or semi-allied force nexus. a place where Jedi, in rare, secret missions, study a different relationship with the dark. Sidious absolutely hates this. His whole plan depends on monopolizing dark side knowledge through the rule of two. And now, there's an entire coven out there teaching a third way. For Ventress, saving Dathomir is a victory and a burden. She finally has living proof of where she comes from, a people and a culture that claim her. But their magic is everything the Jedi warn about. Night speech with spirits, blood rituals, weapons forged in shadow. Each visit home pulls her a little further into gray territory, and the Council can feel it. Now, let's get started on what happens when that tension finally snaps, because the next choice Ventress makes on Dathomir might change the fate of another Skywalker. Now, let's get started on the other side of the board, because while the Jedi are worrying about Ventress walking that gray line, Sidious is already rewriting his entire timeline to compensate. He's lost the chance at a disposable assassin who can duel Kenobi and Anakin at the same time, so he doubles down on the tools he still controls completely. That means Grievous becomes even more of a blunt instrument. In this version, we see more early campaigns where Grievous is thrown at key Jedi squads, not just to bleed the Order, but to specifically test the limits of Ventress's tactics. When she pulls off an impossible extraction or turns a route into a win, Sidious is watching. Each narrow escape is another data point on how to kill her later. Without Ventress as Dooku's pet assassin, Savage Opress's role also shifts. Instead of being a late war escalation, Sidious pushes that project forward. Night Sister alchemy is weaponized sooner, and Savage is unleashed not to replace Ventress, but to overwhelm the front lines while Grievous hits supply chains. The Jedi think they're facing random separatist chaos. In reality, Sidious is stress testing every darkside monster he can field against one Night Sister-trained Jedi general. Now, there will be major spoilers for Maul's usual arc, so there's your warning. In canon, Maul becomes the rogue Darksider, the wildcard who builds his own criminal empire. Here, Sidious has a problem. Ventress already fills the role of unpredictable warrior in the public eye, but she's on the Jedi side, so he either keeps Maul on a much shorter leash, using him as a silent blade for targeted assassinations, or he does the opposite and turns Maul into a full-on terror weapon. There's always a bigger fish moment to break Republic morale. As I said, the real issue isn't just power, it's control. Ventress is a Jedi who still carries Night Sister magic in her bones. She's proven brutally effective in war, she inspires clones, and she preserves a dark-adjacent tradition that Sidious does not own. That terrifies him more than Dooku's occasional doubts. Dooku can be replaced. A popular war hero with her own mystical heritage cannot. So Sidious starts designing operations with her name on them. Separatist raids hit Dathomir when she's off-world, forcing her to choose between saving her squad or her sisters. Assassins strike people she's grown attached to, trying to push her into the kind of rage the Council fears. We get missions where the objective and her conscience don't line up, engineered so that whatever she chooses, someone in the temple will question her loyalty. Pattern interrupt for the Jedi. The greatest threat isn't a Sith storming the temple, it's Sidious quietly widening the cracks between Ventress and the Council, and between Ventress and Anakin. His best chance to win won't come on a battlefield at all, but in those quiet moments when trust falters and someone finally says, "You're not one of us." So, there's your warning. This is where we flip Dark Disciple on its head. In canon, Dooku secretly hires Ventress, the ex-Jedi assassin, and the Council sends Quinlan Vos to work with her on an off-the-books assassination. Here, it's the exact opposite. Ventress is still in the Order, and now the Council has to decide if they're willing to point their own blade into the shadows. Now, let's get started with the Council Chamber, because that's where this version of Dark Disciple really lives. War reports are stacking up, Separatist leaders keep slipping away, and someone brings up a name the Council usually only says when they're already worried: Asajj Ventress. Mace argues that they were losing too much ground, and that conventional Jedi tactics just weren't cutting it. Yoda pushes back, warning that turning a former Night Sister into a precision weapon might win battles while losing the Order's soul. We can picture that episode in our heads. Mace points out that Ventress can move through underworld channels the other Jedi barely understand. She speaks the language of bounty hunters, crime lords, even old Dathomiri contacts. Other masters quietly fear that every time they send her out for a targeted strike, they're not just using her skills, they're feeding the very instincts they claim to be guiding. As I said, the tension now isn't Ventress versus the Jedi, it's the Jedi versus themselves, with her standing in the middle. Ventress herself doesn't walk into this blindly. She accepts these missions with clear conditions, and this is where her stable temple upbringing really matters. She will infiltrate, intimidate, deceive, and scare separatist commanders into surrender or exposure. She'll pull a "you will tell me what I want to know" on some corrupt senator and mean it. But she refuses outright assassination, refuses cruelty for its own sake, and makes it very clear that if the Council wants a Sith-style enforcer, they can go hire one. This is where Quinlan Vos enters the timeline much earlier as a deliberate pairing, not a secret romance assignment. The Council looks at their roster of unconventional Jedi and lands on the guy who reads memories off objects and jokes with clones in the middle of firefights. Put him with Ventress and you either get balance, or a squad of terrified crime bosses. Sometimes he tempers her, pulling her back from the edge. Other times, his own flexible morality amplifies her instincts, and they come home with results, and a report that makes Obi-Wan raise an eyebrow. Now, there will be major spoilers for the Jedi's reputation as this war drags on. These covert operations work. Separatist cells vanish, supply lines crumble, and a few key leaders retire in fear. But every success deepens the internal debate over what the Jedi are becoming. And at the center of that debate isn't a fallen traitor on the outside. It's Knight Asajj Ventress, the Council's secret weapon, standing in the light while everyone wonders how bright that light really is. These covert wins turn Ventress into a legend on the front, but now we hit the uncomfortable question. At what point does a Jedi stop being a guardian and start being something much darker? The Order has always walked that line in the Clone Wars, but with their secret weapon, that line starts to blur in very specific, very unsettling ways. We see it on a shattered separatist world where a local governor has been quietly feeding intel to the droids. Ventress corners him in his palace, clone squad helmets still smoking in the halls, and she doesn't give a noble speech. She lays her sabers on his desk and calmly threatens to expose his family as collaborators unless he broadcasts a surrender order to every garrison on the planet. It works. Thousands of clones and civilians are spared, but the recording of that conversation horrifies more traditional Jedi. On another campaign, she stages what is basically a psychological operation that would make even Krell raise an eyebrow. Ventress uses Force illusions to make a droid commander believe an entire Republic armada has dropped out of hyperspace above his city. Gunships that aren't there, walkers that don't exist, artillery that's just in his mind. The droids retreat, the city is taken without a shot, and Plo Koon quietly asks her, "At what cost to yourself, Knight Ventress?" From her point of view, the math feels simple. Every clone that comes home, every siege that ends in days instead of months, is proof that her edge is necessary in a galaxy this brutal. As I said, she grew up on Dathomir and survived warlords and slavers before she ever held a training saber. Mercy, to her, isn't softness. Mercy is ending the fight as fast as possible, even if you have to terrify the enemy to do it. Now, let's get started on the Anakin comparison, because this is where it gets really interesting. Anakin bends the code when someone he loves is in danger. His worst moments are fueled by fear and attachment. Ventress, staying in the Order, drifts in a different direction. She'll push the limits for a battalion she's never met, for a nameless village on a tactics map. He's passion, she's cold pragmatism. Both are far from the serene ideal, but for totally different reasons. The Council notices. They were already uneasy using a Dathomiri prodigy as their shadow blade, and now reports pile up. Civilians threatened. Enemies broken by terror instead of disarmed in clean duels. Eventually, they sideline her from frontline duty for reflection. On paper, it's a temporary reassignment to temple security and training. In her heart, it feels like exile without the word. This is where it really hurts. After everything she's sacrificed, after every episode of the war where her tactics saved worlds, the message she hears is, "We don't trust you." Now, there will be major spoilers for her future in this timeline, so there's your warning, but we're watching a fork in the road form in real time. Does the Order's refusal to fully accept who she is push her toward the very darkness they fear? Or does this version of Ventress decide to turn that pain into fuel and try to reform the Jedi from within? The next step she takes will decide which way the galaxy tilts. So, there's your warning, because the next mission in this timeline is where Ventress stops being just Anakin's sharp-tongued partner and becomes the first Jedi to really stare his darkness in the face. It happens on what should have been a routine deployment. Anakin and Ventress are leading a mixed squad of 501st and 212th clones to secure a separatist listening post that's been tracking Republic convoys. When they arrive, they don't find droids at the perimeter. They find helmets. Rows of clone helmets, blaster marks in the durasteel, scorch trails leading inside. The garrison was executed after surrendering. For Anakin, that's all it takes. Inside the station, they corner the responsible commander, a Neimoidian tactician who ordered the clones lined up and shot. The droids are down, the battle is over, and this guy drops his weapon and starts begging for mercy. Anakin's saber goes to his throat anyway. We've seen that look in his eyes on Tatooine and later on Mustafar, but now Ventress is there to watch it ignite in real time. She doesn't see a shocking outburst from the Chosen One. She sees a pattern, Night Sister stories of warriors who let vengeance hollow them out. Echoes of her own rage when pirates killed Kai Narek in the old timeline. As I said, this Ventress never fell, but the scars are still there, and she recognizes the way Anakin's hand trembles, not from restraint, but from wanting to push further. She calls a halt, but not with Obi-Wan's gentle, "Now, now, Anakin." She steps in, blade lit, and says, "He's unarmed. You kill him, you're not a general, you're an executioner." That hits harder than any lecture from the Council, because it's coming from someone who has actually fantasized about doing the same thing. The Neimoidian whimpers, the clones shift uncomfortably, and Anakin eventually pulls back, but the damage is done. Ventress doesn't let it go. Later, in the gunship, she corners him away from the squad. Now, let's get started on one of the rawest arguments of the war. She calls out his attachment to Padme without naming her, his terror of losing anyone, his need to control every outcome. He snaps that she doesn't understand love, throws her Dathomir heritage in her face, even tosses out a, "You're starting to sound like the Council," for good measure. That's the pattern interrupt. She laughs. Not because it's fun, but because it's so wrong. "I understand wanting to burn the galaxy for someone you lost," she says. And for a second he has no comeback. Their bond fractures here. They were easy battlefield partners before. Now there's a crack running through every mission. But Anakin can't file her away as a naive council mouthpiece. She's naming the exact pull he feels, with words Obi-Wan and Yoda are too careful to use. That plants a dangerous seed of self-awareness. And from Sidious's perspective, this is a problem. The slow, quiet grooming of Anakin Skywalker now has an internal saboteur, a Jedi who has walked up to the edge of the abyss and is stubbornly refusing to jump, while dragging the Chosen One back from it, over and over, long before Mustafar ever enters the timeline. So now we jump forward in the timeline to one of the best arcs in all of Clone Wars, the Siege of Mandalore. And this is where a loyal Jedi Ventress quietly breaks the whole board without ever realizing it. Because Ventress never fell, she's not hiding in the shadows or working as Dooku's assassin. She's on the front lines as a fully trusted Jedi Knight and battle-hardened general. When Bo-Katan comes to the Republic for help, the Council doesn't just debate sending Ahsoka with a token squad. They have a far more dangerous option on the table, pairing their two most unconventional women together. As I said, that's a very different task force than in the original episode. I thought it would be fun to imagine that briefing. Mace and Yoda outline Maul's return. Obi-Wan is torn between Coruscant and Mandalore, and then Plo Koon quietly suggests Ventress, the Order's expert on irregular warfare, infiltration, and of course dueling rogue Sith. Now, there will be major spoilers for the end of the war, so there's your warning. On the Venator heading to Mandalore, we get something we never had on screen. Ahsoka and Ventress in the same squad, but on the same side. Two women who have both pushed back against the Council, both seen its blind spots, but made opposite choices. Ahsoka walked away. Ventress stayed and fought from the inside. You can almost hear Ahsoka echoing Rex's old line, asking, "Isn't that treason?" And Ventress giving Obi-Wan's answer right back, "We're at war. This is our only option." Their conversations between battles become a running commentary on what the Jedi should be. Ventress admits the Council is rigid, that politics have poisoned the war, but she also talks about Kai Narek, about being saved from Dathomir and deciding she would not let the Order lose another child to the dark. Ahsoka, of course, pushes on the Council's failures with her trial. Together they sketch a version of the Jedi that sounds closer to what Yoda is only starting to glimpse. Then Maul enters the picture. In canon, he toys with Ahsoka. Here, he immediately recognizes Ventress, not as a rival assassin, but as the life he thinks he was denied, a weapon who stayed loyal. Their duel in the Mandalorian throne room isn't just blades, it's Maul sneering that the Jedi are doomed, that Sidious owns the clones, that all her faith will get her is a firing squad. Ventress throws it back at him, pointing out that he had the same choice she did and still clings to Sidious's scraps. Now, let's get started on the real twist. With Ventress backing her up, Ahsoka's position is much stronger. She's not a lone ex-Padawan asking Rex to trust a vague feeling. She has a decorated Jedi Knight at her side who has spent the whole war watching the clones, spotting oddities, questioning Kaminoan secrecy. When Order 66 hits, Rex hesitates a little longer. The inhibitor chip fight lasts a little shorter, and Ahsoka has one more lightsaber between her and the firing line. But the trap still closes. Sidious doesn't get the clean, perfect execution he planned. Instead of two fugitives barely escaping a cruiser, he now has three highly skilled survivors who've seen just enough of his plan to start pulling at the threads. And that means the next phase of the story is going to spiral away from his precious design, even as the Empire is born right on schedule. So now we hit the moment where Sidious stops playing in the shadows and just flips the table. Order 66 still exists, the inhibitor chips are still buried in every clone's brain, but this time, there's a Jedi on the board who is literally raised between the light and the dark. As I said, that changes how the command feels in the Force. We know from the Clone Wars that the chips override free will. They were grown into the clones on Kamino, sold as a safeguard against rogue Jedi, and hardwired to respond to a single coded phrase from Sidious. Fives dies trying to expose that whole plot. Now, there will be major spoilers, so there's your warning. In this timeline, Ventress actually listened to him on Coruscant and filed those concerns away, even if she never found proof. So when Sidious whispers, "Execute Order 66, we stay with Ventress on some Outer Rim battlefield. The clones around her stiffen, but she feels it first. There's this psychic lurch, like Dathomirian blood magic dragging a net through the Force. For a split second, she sees it. A cold, focused will, pouring through millions of identical minds, snapping those inhibitor chips online one by one. That glimpse buys her maybe half a heartbeat. It's not much, but for Ventress, it's everything. Blaster rifles start to rise, and she's already moving, sabers igniting in a crossblock as the first volley screams in. She doesn't go full Grievous. Instead, she's deflecting to the ground, ripping rifles away with the Force, shoulder-checking troopers into cover rather than cutting them down. She's shouting their names, using nicknames they were proud of from that first chaotic deployment, trying to punch through the programming. Now, let's get started on how her squad reacts, because this is where her command style matters. These clones respected her because she fought in the mud with them. traded good soldiers follow orders jokes with them, and actually listened when they questioned tactics. That history doesn't break the chip, but it does create friction. One sergeant's hands shake on the trigger, another fires wide on purpose, a third tackles Ventress like he's executing her, then hisses in her ear to run while he turns and shoots at his own men. In that chaos, a handful escape with her. They were already the odd ones out, the fives types who asked too many questions. Ventress drags them into a gunship bay, slams the doors, and uses every Night Sister trick she remembers to cloud their signatures in the Force, as the cruiser turns on its Jedi generals. When they finally jump to hyperspace, the cost hits her. The Republic she bled for, the clones she loved as brothers and students, and the Jedi Order that saved her from Dathomir have all been twisted into the same weapon. I thought it would be fun to explore her as a steadfast Jedi, but this is the fracture point where that steady line snaps, and the direction she chooses next is going to put her on a collision course with someone we have not talked about yet. That collision course starts with silence, not the calm, meditative kind Ventress learned in the temple, but the dead quiet of a Star Destroyer's guns going cold over a burning world while she hides in the wreckage, ash in her lungs and a training saber still clipped to her belt out of habit. The Republic is gone, the clones are hunting, and she refuses to ignite her blade in hatred. Order 66 hits her squad mid-evacuation on some no-name Outer Rim world. These were her men, the ones she'd sparred with in the barracks and traded good soldiers follow orders jokes with after-long campaigns. When their eyes go glassy and their rifles come up, she doesn't answer with rage. She answers with every Night Sister trick and Jedi drill she has, vanishing into smoke, stunning instead of killing, using the terrain to escape, rather than stand and butcher the brothers she once trained. Now, there will be major spoilers for her emotional state here, so there's your warning. In the days after, she moves through the underworld in layers. Temple discipline keeps her focused, but the Dathomirian in her grieves loudly. She mourns the clones they were before the chips, and she replays every ruthless choice she made as a general, wondering if the Jedi's militarization, her own push for results, helped clear the runway for this new empire. We see that tension when she first brushes against the early Inquisitorius. On a refueling moon, she senses a cold, precise presence interrogating a mechanic's child who accidentally moved a hydrospanner with the Force. The figure isn't a Sith in the old sense. They're an Imperial blade wrapped in familiar armor and codes, a proto-Inquisitor backed by clone troopers and Venators now painted in Imperial gray. In that moment, Ventress understands. Sidious didn't just win. He recycled the entire war machine and stapled the dark side onto it. This could be her fork in the road. She could become the nightmare version of herself from canon, a shadow that stalks Imperial officers, an assassin who answers genocide with targeted slaughter. It would even be easy. Her dual saber form and Night Sister stealth are perfect for it. But as I said earlier, this is a Ventress who never left the Jedi. So she makes a different call. She sabotages transports instead of throats, misdirects patrols, and focuses every operation around one goal: protect, not punish. Pattern interrupt here. She starts recruiting, but not the way the Empire does. I thought it would be fun to flip that. Instead of stealing kids for a dark academy, she appears in the alleys of Coruscant's lower levels, or on backwater spaceports, when a frightened parent whispers that their child moved a toy without touching it. Now, let's get started on her legend. Over the next few years, stories spread of a Jedi witch with pale skin and yellow tattoos who arrives when stormtroopers close in, carves open binders and blasts doors, and then disappears with the children into the stars. To the Empire, she's a priority fugitive. To Vader's hunters, she's a frustrating ghost on their timeline, always one hyperspace jump ahead. And to the scattered survivors of the Order, she's proof that the Jedi way can survive in the shadows without becoming the very darkness they fought. Now, let's get started on the moment the Empire finally corners our ghost. All that hit-and-run work with rescued younglings eventually brings Vader down on her, And the confrontation doesn't happen on Coruscant or Mustafar, but on a forgotten, dust-blown world where Ventress is hiding a tiny squad of Force-sensitive refugees in crumbling ruins that used to be a Republic listening post. They were living quiet, almost boring lives, running drills, meditating, and telling half-remembered stories about the Jedi Temple. Then, just like that meteor shower over the Rishi outpost, the sky fills with fire. This time it's not droids though. Lambda shuttles scream down, flanked by TIEs, and out steps Darth Vader with a trio of Inquisitors at his back. Now, there will be major spoilers for how bad this goes for the Empire's pride, so there's your warning. Ventress moves first. As I said, she's not the cackling assassin from the old timeline, she's a hardened Jedi Knight who's seen too much. She ignites both sabers in that familiar reverse grip and carves through the first wave of Purge troopers, turning blaster fire into a spinning wall of red light. The Inquisitors fan out, but Vader just walks straight toward her, methodical, that heavy mechanical breathing cutting through the chaos. When their blades finally clash, it's brutal. Her style is fast, agile, constantly shifting angles the way she once did against Obi-Wan and Anakin, but now every step is calculated to pull Vader away from the refugees. His counters are pure power, hammering down with two-handed strikes that threaten to break her guard with each impact. In the sparks and the smoke, both of them recognize old ghosts. She remembers the reckless knight from the war. He remembers the fierce ally who always took the flank and never backed down. Their dialogue in the middle of this storm is where it really hurts. Ventress hisses that she can still feel Anakin under all that armor, calling out the flashes of hesitation in his movements. Vader fires back that she was always a weapon waiting to be broken, that if she had truly embraced her anger, she would stand beside him hunting the weak. It's that classic Sith, join me pitch, twisted for someone who chose the light. Of course, she can't beat him outright. He's too strong, and the Inquisitors keep circling back in. But she can outthink him. She collapses half the ruin with a timed saber throw and a force pull, cutting Vader off from the inner chambers long enough for the older kids to rush the younglings to a hidden transport. It's a moral victory, not a duel victory, and it absolutely infuriates the Empire. By the time Vader claws free, the ship is already punching through the clouds. Ventress is wounded, exhausted, but watching those children escape hardens something in her. She can't save Anakin now. That part of the timeline is locked. But she can make sure the next generation has a real chance to fight him. And that decision is what sets up her final, most dangerous mission yet. That decision to protect the next generation is where Ventress stops being just a survivor, and quietly becomes an architect. We move from one stolen shuttle of kids to something much bigger, a hidden network that, years before Yavin, already looks a lot like the skeleton of the Rebel Alliance. Now, let's get started with who actually notices her. Bail Organa and Mon Mothma hear whispers from Fulcrum contacts about a Jedi who isn't a Jedi, a Dathomiri witch who somehow quotes the code better than half the Council did. Saw Gerrera hears something different, a warrior who doesn't flinch. Those three represent very different futures for the rebellion, and Ventress walks the razor's edge between them. Her value is obvious. She knows the underworld from both sides. She can walk into a Hutt palace on Nar Shaddaa as the Night Sister who once worked for Dooku, but then slip out the back as the Jedi Knight who can mind trick a stormtrooper squad into thinking they already searched this freighter. I thought it would be fun to lean into that duality, because it lets her smuggle dissidents, defecting clones, and Force-sensitive kids right under Imperial noses. We watch her organize cells the way she once organized strike teams. There's a Rodian slicer cell on Corellia she trains in hit-and-run sabotage, quoting old commando briefings from the Clone Wars. There's a group of ex-clones on Braca who still call themselves a squad, and she drills them in how to fake malfunctions in Imperial walkers so they accidentally step on fuel depots. As I said, this is the same tactical brain that once kept up with Anakin and Obi-Wan, just turned loose in the shadows. Of course, that creates friction. Mon Mothma is horrified when Ventress suggests staging a haunting on an Imperial governor's estate, using subtle Night Sister illusions to make him crack on public holofeed. Saw thinks it's hilarious and quotes, "Fear is a powerful ally," in a twisted echo of old Jedi lessons. We get those old council debates back, but now the stakes are civilian lives instead of battle droids. Running underneath all of this is her real obsession, the kids. Ventress quietly maps out safe houses from the mid-rim to the outer rim, working with surviving temple archivists to identify Force sensitives. A mining station on Cato Nemoidia, a monastery on Jedha, a refitted medical frigate drifting near Polis Massa. Each one becomes a waypoint on a route that, years later, people will simply call the Path. Now there will be major spoilers when we eventually talk about Obi-Wan and Reva, so there's your warning. But in this timeline, they're walking corridors Ventress helped carve. She never stands on a podium, never signs the Declaration of Rebellion. But when the Alliance to Restore the Republic finally forms, their encrypted channels, safe routes, and guerrilla manuals all carry her fingerprints. And her final, most dangerous mission? That's where this hidden network is truly tested. And this is where Ventress becomes something the Old Council never really had. A bridge between worlds the Jedi barely understood, and powers the Empire desperately wants to erase. Now, let's get started with what that actually looks like in this timeline, because it's not robes and council seats, it's back alleys, forgotten temples, and whispered lessons. As a Night Sister raised Jedi who survives the Purge, she is uniquely positioned for this role. She remembers incense and ichor on Dathomir, then meditation halls and training remotes in the temple. The Old Order talked about barbaric witches and untrained sensitives. Ventress knows those are just people, so when she hears about a Force-attuned child on Lothal or a Guardian sect out on Jedha, she doesn't arrive as an inspector. She arrives as someone who's been both the outsider and the insider. We follow her to Lothal first. The Empire writes it off as a backwater with a convenient factory site. Ventress feels the hum of the Jedi Temple under the plains and realizes it's a nexus. She quietly advises a local mystic who reads the Force through star lore and old paintings, teaching them how to mask signatures, how to make a pilgrimage group look like a harmless farming co-op. It's these are not the Force users you're looking for. Then we jump to Jedha. Now, there will be major spoilers for people who only know it from one movie, so there's your warning. In this timeline, Ventress walks those streets long before the Death Star's test. She trades koans with the Guardians of the Wills, compares Night Sister chants with their mantras, and shows them simple Jedi breathing drills that help them center under interrogation. She doesn't tell them to become Jedi. She tells them to stay themselves and stay alive. Pattern interrupt here. She's not building a new order. That's the key difference. I thought it would be fun to flip the usual secret Grandmaster trope. Ventress is allergic to dogma now. So instead of founding Ventress's squad of enlightened knights, she creates threads, encrypted holocrons hidden in cargo crates, training circles of 3 or 4 students who learn lightsaber forms next to local spirit rites. She records Night Sister spellcraft alongside Sarisu footwork, but she always labels it clearly: context, culture, consent. Of course, Sidious wants a galaxy where the Force is either his or dead. Ventress's quiet project is making that impossible. Every time she helps a shaman on a backwater moon falsify census data, every time she routes a pilgrim convoy through a forgotten hyperspace lane, she's preserving one more spark he can't catalog. And eventually, when Luke Skywalker starts rebuilding the Jedi, he walks into a galaxy that isn't spiritually empty. He finds half-remembered katas that match movements Ventress recorded, hears rumors of a pale Jedi witch who told people the Force belongs to all living things. As I said, he's tracing paths she cleared without ever knowing her name, and the next phase of our timeline builds directly on that foundation. Now we hit the era everyone knows by heart, and I thought it would be fun to drop our reformed Ventress into that original trilogy timeline we've seen 1,000 times. We've watched Luke stare at twin suns and Han complain about the Force being simple tricks and nonsense, but in this version, there's a quiet third thread running alongside them, a survivor Jedi who never fell. Chronologically, Ventress is in her mid-40s during A New Hope, pushing 50 by Return of the Jedi. So she's not the reckless duelist we met in the Clone Wars episodes. She's a seasoned veteran who's outlived the Republic, the Separatists, and most of her own squad of Jedi friends. They were wiped out in the Purge, and she's the one who adapted, changed names, and slipped into the shadows while Vader and Sidious claimed the spotlight. So where is she when the Death Star plans are racing across the galaxy? In this timeline, she's not on Scarif or the Tantive Ifu, but she's one of the invisible hands moving that data. Picture a half-legal cargo run where a grumpy smuggler complains. Some old witch paid double for this crate, said not to open it. Inside is an encrypted relay for the plans, routed through one of Ventress's safe houses. As I said, those little sanctuaries she built for Force sensitives double as waypoints for Rebel intelligence. Now, there will be major spoilers for your headcanon if you've always imagined Luke and Leia as totally alone. So, there's your warning. On Tatooine, Ventress doesn't walk up and introduce herself, but she passes through Mos Eisley once or twice under an alias, checking in on the Kenobi sector without disturbing Obi-Wan's plan. She might be the robed stranger who quietly helps Beru barter, or the presence Luke half remembers seeing near the Dune Sea before everything goes wrong. Direct contact comes later. During the Empire Strikes Back era, when Leia is coordinating cells, there's a moment on some backwater moon where a pale woman in worn leathers hands her a data chip and says, "Your mother believed the Senate could change the galaxy. When that failed, she believed in people." Leia never learns that the woman once sat in the same council chamber as her father's Jedi mentors. Why doesn't Ventress storm the Executor or confront Vader again? She understands, painfully, that if she dies, the fragile network of hidden Force traditions dies with her. Her job isn't to lead X-Wings at Endor, it's to make sure the kids who survive Endor have somewhere to learn. So while Luke duels on the second Death Star, Ventress is off-screen, evacuating a covert enclave, smuggling holocrons, and telling a scared child, "Reach out, feel the Force, it will be with you." By the time the Emperor falls, she's become a hidden guardian of the future, content to let the Skywalkers take center stage while she keeps the stage itself from collapsing. And the next phase of our timeline asks what happens when Luke's new Jedi Order finally stumbles onto the woman who's been preparing the ground for them all along. Now, let's get started with the moment the galaxy flips on its head. When the rumors reach her, whispered through smugglers, half-garbled HoloNet fragments, frightened Imperial deserters, Ventress does what she's trained herself to do for years. She stops. She breathes. She listens to the Force. The Emperor is dead. Vader is gone. And for a heartbeat, there is a raw, almost feral satisfaction. The monster who turned her cloned comrades into executioners, who burned the temple she bled for, has finally fallen. But that satisfaction never turns into celebration. For Ventress, this isn't a victory parade. It's an old wound torn open. The fall of Palpatine rips her straight back to Geonosis, to Order 66, to the smell of burning robes and the echo of blaster fire in Jedi halls. She feels the absence of every knight and youngling who didn't live to see this day, and it twists the moment into something quieter, heavier. The war is over, she thinks, but the work is not, so she does not rush to Coruscant or to Endor. Instead, she watches. As rebel cells become a new republic, as Mon Mothma's speeches replace imperial decrees, Ventress moves through the shadows of the Mid-Rim, testing the currents. She's seen this pattern before. A proud republic, an empire promising order, and now a fresh government full of idealism. As I said, she has a very long memory of how quickly ideals turn into dogma when fear enters the room. She visits the scattered Force enclaves she's been protecting for years. A hidden monastery on a moon where the young meditate among crystal caverns. a half-rebuilt sanctuary in an old separatist bunker, where former partisans now trained sensitives to shield their minds. Under the Empire, survival was the only goal. Now, she carefully nudges them towards something more. Not a new Jedi Order, not yet, but communities that can stand on their own feet, trade openly, and cautiously reveal themselves to sympathetic New Republic officials. Then there is the boy, Luke Skywalker. Of course, he's not a boy anymore by the time their paths cross, but in the Force, she can still feel the farm kid who stared at twin suns and dreamed of more. I thought it would be fun to treat this meeting almost like a lost episode in the timeline, because it changes everything for both of them. Their first contact isn't dramatic. No duel, no "you're hard to find" one-liner. It's a quiet exchange on a neutral world, two strangers who both recognize the way the Force coils around the other. Ventress probes him with questions that sound simple, but cut deep. What will your order be to this new republic? Soldier? Judge? Servant? She offers guarded advice, filtered through 3 regimes of hard lessons. Don't let the Senate use your Jedi as a squad of special forces. Don't turn children into symbols the moment they can lift a stone. Now, there will be major spoilers for the rest of her story as we go on, so there's your warning, but this is where her influence on Luke's plans starts to quietly diverge from the films we know. Because as the New Republic grows, Ventress becomes something rare in Star Wars. A witness who has lived through Republic, Empire, and New Republic, and still refuses to let any flag define her. She's seen clones turned into weapons by politicians, Jedi turned into legends and then into traitors, and emperors turned into gods in people's minds. And as Luke begins sketching out his new Jedi teachings, the question hanging over our timeline is simple. When that fragile new order stumbles, will Ventress stand aside, or step in and change everything again? So she doesn't stand aside. At some point in our timeline, we have to imagine a quiet meeting on some neutral world, far from temples and thrones, where Asajj Ventress sits across from Luke Skywalker and tells him what the Jedi never wanted to hear about themselves. Now, let's get started by picturing it. No council chamber, no throne room, just a small stone courtyard on a trade world that survived both Republic and Empire by staying boring on purpose. Luke arrives with that farm boy politeness we saw on Ahch-To, and Ventress, older and scarred, but still every inch the knight, opens with something closer to Hondo's "Hello, my friend" than Yoda's riddles. She has fought for the Order, for the Republic, and through Sidious's shadow, she knows exactly how the war bent the Jedi out of shape. She walks him through it, the rigid code that told grieving Padawans to bury their pain until it rotted. The way the clones were bred as tools, and the Jedi told themselves it was service. The way the Order slid from peacekeepers to generals, then to symbols stamped on gunships, until Palpatine could turn the whole squad of the galaxy against them with 3 words: traitors to democracy. Now, there will be major spoilers for Luke's future here, so there's your warning. From that story, she pulls out 3 hard lessons. First, emotional honesty. Not the old "there is no emotion" wall, but a discipline that lets fear and attachment be acknowledged and guided instead of repressed. Second, respect for other Force traditions. She's seen Night Sisters, shamans, even half-trained sensitives in the underworld, who were not Jedi and not Sith. And she tells Luke the Order shrank the Force, by pretending they were the only squad that mattered. Third, never again becoming the arm of a government. No more seats on senates. No more marching as commanders in someone else's war. Luke listens. Of course he does, but he's cautious. Obi-Wan and Yoda taught him an older, tighter version of the code, and as I said, they were the last voices of the old temple in his life. We can almost hear him weighing Yoda's adventure, excitement, "A Jedi craves not these things," against Ventress flatly saying, "War will come. Decide now who you are when it does." Here's the pattern interrupt. In our films, Luke builds one remote academy, trains a small, centralized group, and one fallen student nearly ends the whole thing. Under Ventress's influence, that might shift. I thought it would be fun to imagine him sketching out a decentralized network instead. Small enclaves, wandering mentors, contacts with local force cultures, so that no single massacre can wipe out the Order again. Even if he doesn't go all the way, the seeds are there. A more open attitude to scavenger girls who see the Force as a story, or stormtroopers who hear a call and refuse to fire. Those lessons can echo forward into people like Rey and Finn, setting up a future where the Jedi are less a fortress and more a living, changing squad spread across the galaxy. So if those lessons ripple forward into Rey and Finn, what does that actually look like in the sequel era? By the time we reach The Force Awakens on our timeline, Ventress is either extremely old, hidden, or gone entirely. But as I said, in Star Wars the person can vanish and the influence can still be standing right there in the room. The most obvious way is through holocrons. I thought it would be fun to imagine Rey scavenging through some half-collapsed Imperial vaults on Jakku or in a lost Jedi outpost, brushing sand off a small pyramidal device that doesn't look quite Jedi and doesn't look quite Sith. She activates it, and a white-skinned woman with tired eyes and Padawan beads flickers to life. So, Ventress might say, you found the witch the Jedi wouldn't quite claim, and the Night Sisters wouldn't quite own. Now, let's get started. This recording wouldn't be a standard Jedi textbook. It would be Ventress talking candidly about Kai Narek, about Dathomir, about what the Jedi did well and where they failed. She could walk through a balanced form that blends Neiman with Night Sister footwork, explaining when to trust the Council and when to trust the child in front of you. For someone like Rey, who already distrusts rigid dogma and grew up hearing the Force as stories, that kind of voice would land hard. Now, there will be major spoilers for the sequel-era emotional arc here, so there's your warning. Picture Rey wrestling with Luke's cynicism on Ahch-To, then later, alone, training with a holocron of Ventress calmly saying, "The Order is not the Force. The Coven is not the Force. The Force is the river between them." That's the sort of line that could nudge her away from repeating Jedi absolutin and towards something more inclusive, where stormtrooper deserters, scavengers, and former witches can all share the same squad. Out in the wider galaxy, of course, the story mutates. On frontier worlds, people trade rumors about a pale witch Jedi from the Clone Wars who walked with clones and Night Sisters, then spent the dark times smuggling Force-sensitive kids away from the Empire. Some say she rode rancors on Dathomir, others that she single-handedly dueled Vader and laughed at his all-too-easy line. At that point, she's half historical figure, half campfire ghost. We could even hear background pilots in a Resistance episode joke, "Careful, or the White Witch will get you," the way clones once joked about General Krell. But under the humor is respect. Those saved children grow up to be quiet mentors, wandering knights, or parents who tell their kids that the Force belongs to everyone. In that way, Ventress becomes a thread, running from the prequels to the sequels, woven through holocrons, students, and stories. She reminds us that the saga is bigger than the Skywalkers, and sets the stage for the next generation to ask what a truly shared, post-legacy Jedi might look like. Now that we've seen how this Jedi Ventress threads through eras, we should stop and really compare her to the Ventress we actually know from canon. The timeline of Asajj Ventress in the Clone Wars is one of the most tragic in the show, and as I said, it all starts with abandonment. In canon, she's taken from Dathomir, found by Kai Narek, and finally given a home as a Padawan. Then the war on Ratatak rips that away. Narek dies, the Jedi never come back for her, and a warlord weaponizes her rage until Dooku arrives. From there, the pattern is brutal. She's forged into a Sith assassin, sent to hunt Jedi across the galaxy, and used as a scalpel against Anakin and Obi-Wan in episode after episode. Eventually, even that stolen purpose is stripped from her. Sidious orders Dooku to discard her, Dooku betrays her on the Invisible Hand, and she barely escapes to the Night Sisters. She builds a new squad, a new family, only to watch Grievous and Dooku annihilate them too. Dark Disciple gives her one last spark of love and redemption with Quinlan Vos, and then she dies saving him, her body sinking into the depths of Christophsis. That's the canon arc: abandoned, weaponized, betrayed, and finally redeemed through a sacrifice that the wider galaxy never even sees. Now, let's get started on the alternate version standing right beside her. In this timeline, the Jedi never lose track of Ventress after Narek's death. Instead of vanishing into the cracks of the Outer Rim, she's brought fully into the temple, put in a clan of younglings, and given masters who understand where her anger comes from. The fierceness that made her a terrifying assassin now makes her a fearless Jedi general. The loyalty that once chained her to Dooku now anchors her to her clones and her fellow knights. We see the same core traits, but they were given different soil. Canon Ventress uses creativity to cheat death and ambush Jedi in the shadows. Jedi Ventress uses that same creativity to outthink droid armies, to turn doomed sieges into surprise victories, to pull a Rishi Moon moment for entire systems. One is praised by Dooku when she's ruthless. The other is pulled aside by Plo Koon or Shaak Ti when she goes too far, and told, in that very Jedi way, that she is more than her rage. And the galaxy feels the difference. A supported Ventress means a weaker Dooku, because he doesn't have his signature assassin in all those key episodes. The Night Sisters don't meet her as a half-broken exile, but as a bridge between Coven and Council, which makes that eventual confrontation with Grievous and Sidious much messier. Sidious now has to account for a battle-hardened Jedi who fights like a Sith but refuses to fall, which puts extra pressure on his long game with Anakin. Even after the Purge, her survival as a wandering guardian reshapes the rebuilding era. Luke is slightly less isolated, because somewhere out there is a former Jedi general who remembers both the Temple and the Night Sister groves and is willing to teach that the Force belongs to everyone. That doesn't erase the tragedy of Canon Ventress. It throws it into sharper relief. It forces us to ask how many potential protectors the Jedi and the Republic let slip through their fingers. And what happens when one of those lost children finally turns around and looks back at the Order that failed her. So now that we've rebuilt Ventress as this reclaimed Jedi protector, we have to ask the uncomfortable question: does any of this actually stop the Empire? Or are we just changing who survives the fire, rather than putting it out entirely? As I said, there are some pillars of the Star Wars timeline that are really hard to move. Sidious has been playing the long game since before the Phantom Menace, the corruption in the Senate, the corporate control of the war, and the Jedi Order's blind spots were already baked in. Anakin's fear and attachment issues don't vanish just because there's one more cool knight with dual sabers hanging around the temple. So Ventress staying on the light side doesn't snap Palpatine's fingers off the chessboard. What it does is add friction. Suddenly Dooku's not the only terrifying presence on the front lines. On Ryloth, on Christophsis, on all those messy early war episodes, a Ventress-led squad means more clones walking off the field instead of being zipped into bags. We see that with characters like Fives and Echo. One extra survivor at the right moment can echo through the whole war. From Sidious's point of view, that's annoying. Dooku is less secure because there's a former almost apprentice he never got to twist, now standing across from him in open battle. Ventress knows his Makashi tells, she knows his old political speeches, and she's not afraid to call him out in front of Anakin and Obi-Wan. That's huge. Every time Anakin leans into his worst impulses, there's this former war orphan who clawed her way to inner peace saying, "I've been where you're going, turn around." Now, there will be major spoilers here for the big picture of the prequels, so there's your warning. In a best-case scenario, Ventress's presence means a few more Jedi sense that something is off. Maybe she's the one who takes Fives seriously on Coruscant when he's raving about inhibitor chips. Maybe she helps Ahsoka and Rex create not just one escape route from Order 66, but 3. The Night Sisters, protected earlier in the war, endure as a hidden enclave, giving the rebellion a future source of Force users who don't fit the Jedi mold at all. But even a powerhouse like Ventress can't single-handedly rip the chips out of a million clones' heads. She can't veto Palpatine's emergency powers or stop the Death Star once that secret Kaminoan-style assembly line is running. As fun as it is to imagine her storming the Senate and yelling, "I am the Senate," really? The machinery of Empire is bigger than one person, so the broad strokes probably stay. The Republic falls, the Empire rises, the Death Star still hangs over the galaxy. Now, let's get started on what really changes: the texture, the number of survivors, the diversity of Force traditions, the lessons that Luke, Leia, and the next generation can inherit instead of having to rediscover from ashes. Now, let's get started on what that new texture actually feels like from inside Ventress's own head. The core difference in this timeline is emotional gravity. In canon, her life is a chain of people leaving her. Her clan, Kai Narek, Dooku, even the Night Sisters. Here, the temple breaks that pattern early. She has a bed that doesn't move, a saber that isn't taken away, a master who doesn't vanish in the night. That doesn't magically fix everything, of course, but it means she never internalizes the same "everyone betrays me" story that fuels her rage in the show. Instead, her anger becomes something the Order actually sees and works with. We can picture her in the creche, that intense youngling who spars too hard, who wins every training bout and then stands there breathing a little too fast. A healer pulls her aside after a meditation session and says, "You are not your fear." Over years, that repetition lands. She still has the capacity for brutality we recognize from the episodes, but it's bracketed by structure and by people who refuse to walk away. That doesn't mean her life is peaceful. It just means the conflicts shift. Rather than hunting Jedi as Dooku's assassin, she's the Jedi who volunteers for the ugliest assignments. When the Council debates whether to deploy more clones to a doomed front, she's the knight who says the quiet part out loud. We are using them. That directness makes her a legend in the barracks and a problem in the Council chamber. As I said, the machinery of Empire is bigger than one person, but she keeps jamming a saber into its gears. Her relationships become the anchors that keep her from going full Night Sister warlord. The clones call her General Ghost because she's always on the line where the fighting is worst, and she actually remembers their numbers. With Anakin and Obi-Wan, she's the third point of a very odd triangle, sparring with Anakin in the hangar, trading so uncivilized jokes with Obi-Wan, and watching both of them to see how far they'll bend the code. I thought it would be fun to give her a small squad of Padawans later on. Kids who are a little too sharp, a little too angry, and who learn from her that you can be fierce without being cruel. Even with all of that, does she ever truly feel at home? Not completely. She walks the halls of the temple, but part of her is always on Dathomir under a red sky. She studies Jedi forms, but her saber work still has that Night Sister spin, that low, predatory footwork. She exists in a liminal space, between Jedi and Witch, between orthodoxy and rebellion, between the bright council chamber and the shadowed lower levels where she actually feels most honest. And that's where this version of Ventress quietly rewrites what the Order can be. Her greatest achievement in this timeline isn't surviving battles or winning duels. It's proving, day after day, that someone with her history doesn't have to burn everything down to stand in the light. She doesn't erase her past. She brings it with her into the Council, into the War Room, into the next generation of Jedi. So, there's your warning. Once we see her this way, it changes how we read every major event of the Clone Wars that follows. So now that we've reframed Ventress as this battle-hardened but centered Jedi Knight, I thought it would be fun to just start throwing her into the big moments we all know. Not to overwrite the show, but to run a parallel timeline in our heads, where she's on the other side of the battlefield. Let's start on the Invisible Hand. Picture that Revenge of the Sith duel where Anakin and Obi-Wan confront Dooku. Only this time, it's Anakin and Ventress stepping out of the turbolift together. They were the Council's two most aggressive duelists, so of course Sidious is suddenly a lot less comfortable in that chair. Anakin presses Dooku hard, Ventress circles, using that controlled ferocity we talked about, and Dooku realizes he's facing the student he lost, and the chosen one he's trying to steal. Does he even get the chance to surrender? Or do they corner him so cleanly that Palpatine has to improvise and escape right there? Now, let's swing over to Grievous. In the Clone Wars, we see Obi-Wan constantly dancing around him, trading quips like, "How uncivilized." Imagine an episode where Ventress drops in beside him on Utapau or some earlier campaign. Obi-Wan plays defense, Ventress goes straight for the arms, and suddenly Grievous is the one on the back foot, hissing orders to his droid bodyguards as they were peeled away. As I said, her whole thing in this version is channeling rage into precision, so you get that visual of her calmly dismantling a whirling buzzsaw of sabers. Then there's Mandalore. Instead of just Maul and Ahsoka, we get a three-way clash. Maul, Ahsoka, and Jedi Ventress in those shattered throne room rafters. Ahsoka is trying to reach the person underneath Maul's madness. Ventress is reading the political angles, and Maul is howling about Sidious. That conversation about the coming darkness suddenly has two women who both understand what it means to be used by powerful men, pushing back from different directions. We can also do character swaps. What if Ventress is the one who temporarily walks away from the Order during the wrongfully accused arc? Now, there will be major spoilers for that episode run, so there's your warning, but imagine her saying to the Council, "You trained me not to be a weapon, and now you're treating me like one." Ahsoka stays, Ventress leaves, and the person Anakin loses faith in isn't his Padawan. It's the Council's treatment of one of his closest fellow generals. Or flip another moment. Instead of Mace and the others stumbling into Palpatine's office, what if Ventress, doing her own quiet investigation into the war's patterns, is the first Jedi to connect Sidious to Sheev? Now, let's get started imagining how a survivor of Dathomir reacts when she realizes the Chancellor is the same kind of predator who once tore her life apart. On the lighter side, think of new team-ups. Ventress and Rex on a covert mission, where she has to trust clone instincts over Council orders. Ventress and Hondo trapped in a heist gone wrong, with Hondo throwing out, "I am but a humble pirate," while she just stares him down. Or Ventress mentoring a young Caleb Doom, not in flashy saber moves, but in how to rebuild yourself after loss so you don't turn that pain outward. So, there's your warning. Once we start swapping her into these scenes, it's hard to stop. Which specific Clone Wars arc or duel would you most want to rewrite with Jedi Ventress in the squad? And what does that change about the outcome? And the next thing Sidious is forced to do? Now, let's zoom out and talk about why this what if actually matters, because we're not just reskinning duels for fun. Ventress's canon story is brutal for a reason. She's a child of war on Ratatak, briefly rescued by Kai Narek, then abandoned again when he dies, and the Jedi never come back. That's not just her personal tragedy, that's a symptom of a bigger Jedi problem. The Order keeps saying, "We're guardians of peace," but they were terrible at embracing anyone who didn't fit their narrow mold. Think about the pattern. Anakin is too old and too attached. Ahsoka is expendable when the institution needs a scapegoat. The Night Sisters are written off as witches instead of potential allies. Ventress hits all three categories at once. Too angry, too strange, too connected to another Force tradition. In our alternate timeline, the Jedi don't lose her in that gap. They take responsibility for their foundling the way they were supposed to. Instead of letting Kai Narek's death become a black hole that pulls her toward Dooku, they send another master, they keep checking in, they don't treat her grief as a red flag to be managed, but as a wound to be healed. That one boring administrative decision in the temple, who follows up on Narek's missing Padawan, changes everything. Now there will be major spoilers for how the Order usually behaves, so there's your warning. When we imagine Jedi Ventress, we're really testing whether the Order could have been something else. A version that engages with other Force traditions instead of fearing them. A council that sits down with the Night Sisters and says, "Teach us what we don't understand," instead of, "You're dangerous, stay on your swamp world." As I said, this is about potential, not just cool team-ups. This hits real-world nerves too. Institutions fail people who don't fit the standard template all the time. Found family steps in where systems walk away. Early support versus abandonment can send the same kid down a completely different timeline. Canon Ventress becomes the assassin who hunts Jedi through the shadows. Our Ventress, with structure and compassion, turns that same intensity into protection, mentorship, and eventually, accountability for the Order itself. And crucially, imagining her as a Jedi isn't about sanitizing her. We're not turning her into a bland council background extra. That sharp tongue, that Night Sister edge, that willingness to say the quiet part out loud in front of the High Council, that all stays. The difference is where the fire points. Instead of burning everything down, it forces the Jedi to confront their blind spots. I thought it would be fun to end by reframing this as a lens on the shows we already love. When you rewatch the Clone Wars or the prequels, start spotting all the tiny moments where a different choice could have saved someone like Ventress, or Fives, or even Anakin. Now, let's get started on pulling those threads together, recap this whole experiment, and talk about what you can do the next time you hit play on a Clone Wars episode. So, there's your warning that we're about to speedrun this whole alternate timeline, and really see how far one changed decision can go. Now, let's get started by going all the way back to Dathomir. In our version, the story opens the same way. A Dathomiri child with raw power, caught in a war zone. But instead of being stranded, and later found by Kai Narek alone, a Republic relief squad and a Jedi strike team arrive together. Ventress is rescued early, brought straight to the temple, and raised as a youngling inside the system, rather than on the fringes of it. The key difference is that she's never half in the Order. She's fully a temple kid. From there, we walked through her Padawan years as a kind of edge case in the Jedi squad. She still has that Night Sister intensity, but now it's channeled through structure, friends, and actual mentorship. Instead of Dooku whispering in her ear, she spars with Anakin and Obi-Wan, trains under a battle-tested knight, and learns to pair her dual saber aggression with Jedi restraint. By the time Geonosis hits, she's just been knighted, thrown straight from the ceremony into the arena, and immediately marked as one of the Order's most dangerous frontline duelists. During the Clone Wars, that only escalates. Ventress becomes the Jedi's answer to the Separatists' worst monsters. She clashes with Dooku and Grievous on equal footing, leads surgical strikes where the Council needs someone who can fight dirty without falling, and personally returns to Dathomir to keep her people from becoming another pawn in Sidious's game. As I said, she turns into this controversial but invaluable operative. The night the Council debates in private, but keeps sending on the missions no one else can survive. Then we hit the breaking point, Order 66. Because she's already suspicious of the war and close to the clones, she survives the initial betrayal, but instead of going full Avenger, she makes a deliberate choice to protect. We followed her early run-ins with Vader and the Inquisitors, where she uses every trick she learned as a Jedi and every instinct she kept from Dathomir to stay one step ahead, free surviving Jedi, and quietly dismantle the Empire's grip. Eventually, we pushed her into the original and sequel eras. She supports the early rebellion from the shadows, helps preserve scattered Force traditions, and in some versions of this timeline, even becomes a distant advisor to Luke, the mysterious old warrior who understands both attachment and loss. She records holocrons, passes down stories, and leaves an imprint that still felt when Rey is picking up the pieces. And when we contrast that with her canon fate as Dooku's discarded assassin, it underlines the whole point of this experiment. One act of consistent care from the Jedi turns a tragic weapon of the Sith into a guardian who quietly spans 3 eras of Star Wars history. So now it's your turn to take this what if and really run with it. We've walked through one possible timeline where one act of care keeps Ventress in the light, but of course that's just one version. I thought it would be fun to hand the controls over to you and see how wild, or how grounded, your own Jedi Ventress stories get. First, drop into the comments and tell us this. If you could rewrite a single Clone Wars episode or arc with Ventress as a loyal Jedi on the Republic side, which one are you picking and why? Are you throwing her into the Umbara arc as Anakin's co-commander, standing up to Krell the way Fives did, but with a lightsaber and council authority behind her? Or do you put her at the Citadel, tag teaming with Obi-Wan and Echo to carve a cleaner escape that doesn't end in so much loss? To push it further, think about the big philosophical questions. Should she have been Anakin's permanent co-commander for a major campaign? A kind of dark mirror partner who understands his anger but channels it instead of feeding it? In your version of Order 66, does Jedi Ventress manage to save more clones and more masters because she's suspicious of the chips? Or does she go full, I will not let my friends die, and become one of the last guardians of the temple? And at any point in your story, would she ever walk away from the Order in protest, not to become an assassin, but to become a neutral protector the way Ahsoka eventually does? For the fan creators watching, this is where you come in. Writers, turn this into a full squad-based war story, or a quiet character study where she and Anakin argue in a gunship about attachment and fear. Artists, sketch her in Jedi robes leading a squad of clones with blue markings and curved hilts lit. Animators and editors, cut together animatics that stitch her canon duels into new contexts, so she's defending Plo Koon or Shaak Ti instead of hunting them. Now, there will be major spoilers if you take this next challenge on, so there's your warning. Try a Ventress rewatch, go back through every episode she appears in, and at each key turning point, pause and ask, what if the Jedi made a different choice here? What if the Council followed up on Kai Narek's legacy sooner? What if someone actually listened when she reached out? Track how that changes your view of the Council, the war, and even Sidious's long game. As I said, this is just one experiment in changing a single life and watching the galaxy bend around it. Now, let's get started setting up our next what if, because if you enjoyed reimagining Ventress, there are a lot of other character-focused alternate timelines you're going to want to see. So now that we've walked through this entire alternate timeline for Asajj Ventress, I thought it would be fun to zoom out and talk about where we go from here. If this kind of full timeline what-if breakdown worked for Ventress, it can absolutely work for a lot of other Clone Wars favorites. If you want more of these deep dives, this is the part where I have to say it. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode in this little what-if series. We're talking full rewrites of the war from one character's point of view. A redeemed Maul who actually escapes Sidious's shadow, a Fives who survives long enough to warn the whole squad about the inhibitor chips, or an Order 66 that fails because too many clones refuse to pull the trigger. Those are all timelines we can map out step by step. Now, there will be major spoilers for other arcs when we do that, so there's your warning in advance for future videos. If you've got that one friend who insists the Clone Wars has some of the best character work in Star Wars, or someone who already loves Ventress from the Night Sister arc and Dark Disciple, share this video with them. It's a fun way to rewatch those episodes in your head from a totally fresh angle, asking what changes if one conversation in the Jedi Temple goes differently. As I said, this series only works if we build it together. So let me know in the comments what you want next. Do we explore an Ahsoka who stays in the Order and forces the Council to change? A Dooku who never leaves and becomes the one warning the Jedi about Sidious from the inside? Or a galaxy where entire clone legions refuse Order 66 and turn their training against the Empire before it can form? Tell me which timeline you want us to put in order, and we'll start from their first appearance all the way to their final fate. Underneath all of this, we're really talking about what Star Wars has always been about: destiny and choice pulling on each other. Ventress, in canon or in this alternate path, proves that one act of compassion, a master refusing to abandon a frightened youngling, a Jedi reaching out one more time, can bend the entire war. It doesn't erase the darkness, but it changes who stands in it and who walks out. So we'll fade out on this thought. Somewhere in the multiverse of stories, there is a version of Asajj Ventress who stayed with the Jedi, who led clones into battle as their general, who survived Order 66 and helped rebuild. She got to be the hero she always had the potential to become. Imagining her doesn't replace the tragic, beautiful version we did get. It helps us appreciate how powerful her story is from both sides of the Force. Now let's get started on the next what if.